a slap in a courtroom, or the spark that lit a fire beneath years of quiet abuse? When two officers assaulted a woman they believed to be just another nobody, they thought it was business as usual. What they didn't know was that she wasn't a bystander. She was the daughter of Sylvester Stallone. And within 5 minutes, the system they relied on began to crumble. This is a story about arrogance, injustice, and the kind of justice that doesn't whisper. It roars. Stay with us, because what unfolds next will challenge everything you think you know. Tell us where you're watching from and how you found this moment. We read every comment, and your voice matters more than ever. It was a gray, heavy morning in Newark, New Jersey. The kind of day that presses down on your chest and makes everything feel more tired than it should. Along the edges of the ironbound district, where old Portuguese bakeries stood shoulder to shoulder with boarded-up storefronts and forgotten laundromats, a narrow bodega called Tony's Market quietly opened its doors like it had for the past 30 years. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the shelves leaned under the weight of overstocked cans and underfunded maintenance. Customers came and went quickly here. No one lingered. People who lingered in neighborhoods like this often had their motives questioned. And that's exactly what happened the moment Sophia Rose Stallone stepped through the door. She didn't look like the kind of person who belonged in that part of Newark. Her hoodie was pulled up over messy hair, her sweatpants were plain and scuffed at the knees, and the canvas bag hanging over her shoulder looked more like something picked up at a donation center than a designer store. She didn't move like she was lost, though. She moved with quiet purpose, heading straight for the drinks cooler and grabbing a bottle of water and a couple of granola bars. She glanced outside once, toward a narrow alley where a small boy with dirt on his cheeks sat cross-legged under a stairwell. She was buying for him. No one inside knew that. All they saw was a white girl dressed too plain, carrying too little, acting too calm. Behind the counter, Lou, an old-timer who'd run the place since the Clinton administration, watched her with narrowed eyes. Lou wasn't a bad man, but he had rules in his head about who was trouble and who wasn't. And Sophia checked too many of the wrong boxes that day. He nodded at the teenager stocking shelves, who slipped out the door and made a quick call to the local precinct. Said a suspicious individual might be trying to shoplift. It took less than 5 minutes for the police to arrive. The sound of sirens didn't scream. They sneered. The cruiser stopped so hard the front bumper nearly kissed the curb. Out stepped 2 officers, Sergeant Kyle Hagan, tall, broad, with a bulletproof stare and the kind of authority that dared you to blink wrong, and Officer Matt Decker, younger, less sure of himself, but already trained in the silent art of compliance without question. Hagan led the way. He didn't ask who made the call or what was actually reported. He saw Sophia standing at the counter with the items in hand, and made his decision in a heartbeat. "Hey, you!" he barked. "Step away from the counter. Hands where I can see them." Sophia turned slowly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, eyes steady. "We got a report of a theft in progress," Hagan said, already approaching, already judging. "You matched the description." She looked down at her hoodie, then back up. "And what description is that?" "You look like you don't belong here," Decker said, not cruelly, but plainly, as if it was fact. "What's in the bag?" "Snacks," Sophia said. "I haven't stolen anything. I was just about to pay." That was the moment everything could have stopped. But it didn't. Hagen stepped closer, towering now. "Don't get smart with me," he snapped. And then, with no warning, no build-up, no hesitation, he raised his hand and slapped her across the face. It was loud, sharp, deliberate. The kind of slap that stops time. Sophia's head jerked to the side, her hood fell back, and the store went silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator motor. One woman near the back dropped her can of soup. Someone gasped. A teenage girl raised her phone and started recording. Sophia didn't fall. She didn't even step back. She stood there, eyes blinking once, hand slowly rising to her cheek. The red print of his hand was already blooming. She turned back to face him, eyes colder now. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Hagen rolled his eyes. "Is that supposed to scare me?" "No," she replied, reaching into her bag slowly and pulling out a black leather ID case. "But this might." She flipped it open and handed it to him. The card was sharp-edged, gold-trimmed, and carried the name, Sophia Rose Stallone, Director of Humanitarian Outreach, City of Newark. Emergency contact, Sylvester E. Stallone. The room changed. The air shifted. Hagen took a half step back, but his mouth still moved. "Stallone? Like what, Rocky? You think your daddy's name means something to me?" Before the last syllable left his lips, the front door of the bodega flew open with a force that made the bell above it tremble. A man stepped inside, gray hair, black leather jacket, eyes like burning coals. He didn't look around. He didn't ask questions. He walked straight to Sophia. Sylvester Stallone, father, icon fighter. Without a word, he reached up and gently touched his daughter's bruised cheek. Then, turning slowly, he locked eyes with Hagen. "Did you hit my daughter?" he asked. Hagen started. "Sir, there was a situation. She wasn't cooperating." And that's as far as he got. In one smooth, devastating motion, Stallone's fist flew through the air with the force of memory, history, and fury. It connected squarely with Hagen's jaw. The sergeant flew backward, knocked into a shelf of canned beans that crashed down around him. Decker instinctively reached for his sidearm, but froze when Stallone raised one finger. "Don't," he said. "You lay a hand on her again. Andy, I swear, badge or not, I'll knock your teeth into next Thursday." The room was silent except for the phones now filming from every angle. Sophia said softly, "Dad, I'm okay." "Not anymore," he replied. "This ends today." Then he turned to the room, to every stunned witness, every customer, every cashier. "You think she's the first? She's just the one you recognize too late." Outside, people were already gathering. Word spread faster than any siren. Within 30 minutes, the slap, the punch, the name Stallone, it was all over the internet. News vans raced down the block. Hashtags trended. Protesters began to fill the sidewalk, holding signs before they even knew the full story. But Sophia knew it. She had been quietly working for months, collecting testimony from women who were stopped, searched, harassed, and dismissed just because they looked out of place. She hadn't worn the hoodie to hide. She wore it to feel what others felt, to disappear like they had been forced to. And that day, she didn't disappear. She got hit, she got seen, and now she was going to make damn sure no one ever looked away again. By the next morning, Newark wasn't just a city. It was a headline. Local news had exploded overnight, and by dawn, national outlets had taken hold of the story with hungry precision. The video of Sergeant Hagen slapping Sophia Stallone had reached over 8 million views. But it wasn't just the slap that stunned the public. It was the punch. That slow, deliberate right hook delivered by Sylvester Stallone himself. The kind of punch that didn't just knock a man down. It knocked open a door that had been sealed shut for too long. Most people didn't even know Sophia existed. To them, she wasn't a celebrity's daughter, but now she had become a symbol of restraint, of resilience, of the everyday woman who gets dismissed for looking less than. And unlike so many who had no power, Sophia had a camera, a platform, and now the full weight of the public eye behind her. But she hadn't asked for it. In a modest office in downtown Newark, above a legal aid center with flickering lights and a slow elevator, Sophia sat at a worn desk covered in folders, notes, and voice memos. She looked out the window toward the street where people now held signs that read, "Justice for Sophia," "Slapped for Existing," and "We Are Not Nobodies." Her team, mostly women in their late 20s and 30s, had been with her for months, collecting testimonies of undocumented harassment, mostly from women in low-income areas, mostly from officers who never saw consequences. It had started as a quiet research project, something she intended to submit to the mayor's office. But now, it had become something else entirely. Her longtime friend and legal strategist, Marin Klein, stood across from her, holding a stack of manila envelopes. "They're coming out of the woodwork," Marin said, her voice hushed but tense. "We've had 39 new reports since midnight, all women. 4 say it was Hagen. 10 say it was someone else in the same precinct. A few have physical injuries, and they're ready to talk." Sophia said nothing. Her fingers brushed lightly over the scarlet print still fading from her cheek. "We don't need vengeance," she finally said. "We need a spotlight. We need the rot to be undeniable." Meanwhile, at City Hall, panic had seeped into the woodwork. Mayor Leonard Briggs, once a quiet, moderate content to coast through his term with minimal headlines, now found himself cornered in back-to-back calls with the governor's office, the attorney general, and even a staffer from the Department of Justice. The image of one of New Jersey's most recognizable public servants being struck on video, and the public discovering that officer had a history of dismissed complaints, was setting off alarms far beyond Newark. Damage control had already failed. What the city wanted was silence. What it got was fire. The police department issued a bland, defensive statement, citing standard protocol under ongoing review. It backfired. Almost instantly, survivors started posting under the hashtag number sign, slapped and silenced, recounting their own stories of being shoved, cursed at, or laughed off by uniformed officers in the same precinct. None had video. None had backup. Until now. On social media, Stallone's punch was dubbed the People's Fist. Memes flooded the internet. But beneath the humor was an anger that pulsed steadily like a heartbeat. For many, it wasn't about Stallone. It was about the thousands of women who didn't have a father walk in after the first blow. Sophia wasn't in hiding, but she didn't do interviews either. Not yet. Instead, she spent the day listening. Sitting in a small room with gray walls and a single camera, she heard story after story from women who came forward. A grandmother detained for loitering outside her apartment. A nurse accused of being drunk because she spoke with a stutter. A high school student shoved to the ground when she asked why her friend was being frisked. One woman cried as she spoke of the humiliation of being handcuffed in front of her son for not having her license on her. Sophia took it all in, every word, every pause, every piece of anger wrapped in years of silence. She didn't interrupt. She didn't speak. She just wrote. Late that evening, Sophia finally stepped into the spotlight. CNN had requested a live statement. Against her better judgment, she agreed. Standing at a podium in front of the Newark courthouse, surrounded by dozens of women from all walks of life, she spoke into a dozen microphones with a voice clear and unwavering. This isn't about a slap. It's about the message that slap carried, that some people can be judged, dismissed, or hurt simply because they don't look like they belong. That power can be exercised without thought, without hesitation, without consequence. I may have a famous name, but what happened to me happens to people every day who don't. The only difference is I had a camera, I had a witness, and now we're all witnesses. The next morning, the Department of Justice officially announced a formal investigation into the Newark Police Department. Internal affairs records were unsealed, revealing a stunning number of misconduct claims tied to Sergeant Hagan and others in the same unit. Dozens of those claims had been dismissed without proper review. The state's Attorney General, Angela Hart, a former civil rights lawyer, held a press conference stating clearly, "We are not pursuing symbolic justice. We are pursuing structural change." As pressure mounted, Sergeant Hagan was placed on administrative leave. But the public wanted more. They wanted accountability, and more than that, they wanted truth. Behind the scenes, Sophia and her team compiled the data they'd gathered over the past year into a comprehensive report titled Patterns of Silence, highlighting not only abuse by individuals, but a system of shielding misconduct through delayed investigations, missing body cam footage, and intimidation tactics. They found evidence of retaliation against officers who spoke up, including a female officer who had resigned after being assigned to night shifts in dangerous neighborhoods as punishment for filing a report. Sophia met quietly with that officer. Her name was Tanya Ruiz. She was in her 40s, had a daughter in college, and had spent 15 years trying to believe she could change things from the inside. That belief had died a slow, painful death. When Sophia asked why she left, Tanya simply said, "Because I got tired of being the only one who believed victims." That sentence stayed with Sophia. It echoed louder than the slap, longer than the applause after her speech. It became the thesis of her work. If the system was going to change, it needed more than data. It needed courage. Not the kind that shows up in capes, but the kind that shows up in quiet rooms, listens without judgment, and keeps the tape rolling. At the end of the week, Sophia received a call from the governor's office requesting a closed-door meeting. She arrived without security, without an entourage, just a binder full of stories. She spoke for 90 minutes straight. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then the governor, after a long pause, leaned forward and said, "We need your help, not just to clean this up, but to build something better." By the time Sophia left the Capitol that evening, the lights of Trenton glimmered across the Delaware River like a quiet promise. The work ahead would be long. The resistance would be loud. But for the first time in a long time, someone had listened, not to the noise, but to the truth. The first courtroom hearing began on a rainy Thursday morning. Gray skies hung low over Newark, like the city itself was holding its breath. Reporters gathered on the courthouse steps, umbrellas blooming like black flowers, as lenses pointed toward a building that had for years held secrets behind oak-paneled walls and polished brass plates. Inside, The energy was tense but focused. The courtroom was filled not just with lawyers and journalists, but with people, ordinary citizens who had lived too long in the corners of this city's attention. Women who had once been afraid to speak now sat in the front row, their shoulders square, their eyes fixed on the woman who sat quietly at the witness stand. Sylvester Stallone wore no makeup. Her hair was tied back. The fading mark on her cheek had long since disappeared, but everyone could still see it. It lived in every still frame, every replayed clip, every headline. She sat with her hands clasped in her lap, posture straight, voice calm as she began to tell the story, not just of what happened in the bodega, but of what she had seen in the months before and after. She spoke of patterns, of silence, of fear that hung in the air like smoke. She read from testimonies of women who hadn't been believed. She quoted from internal emails that dismissed complaints with phrases like unsubstantiated or likely exaggerated. The room didn't move. Every word landed like a slow drumbeat. Across from her sat Sergeant Kyle Hagan, dressed in a suit instead of his uniform, jaw tight, fingers twitching. He hadn't spoken publicly since the incident, but his silence had grown heavier with each passing day. Behind him sat the city's legal defense team, men and women whose faces betrayed the discomfort of defending a man who had become a national disgrace. When Sophia finished, she didn't look at Hagan. She looked at the judge. "I don't want retribution," she said. "I want recognition. Not for me, for the people who didn't have a camera, for the ones who didn't have a father walk in the door, for the ones whose stories died in the inboxes of internal affairs." The judge nodded slowly. The room exhaled. Outside, crowds had gathered again. Some held signs, others simply stood in silence. One young girl, no older than 10, wore a handmade T-shirt that read, "Speak for her." It was simple. It was enough. As the hearing adjourned, reporters swarmed, microphones raised, questions hurled like confetti. Sophia didn't speak. She simply walked down the steps, her father by her side, not towering but steady, protective without overtaking. When asked how he felt about what had happened, Sylvester Stallone simply said, "She speaks better than I ever could." I threw a punch. She's throwing light. It was a line that would be repeated across social media, news anchors quoting it with solemn admiration. But Sophia's focus wasn't on applause. It was on action. Over the next several weeks, the investigation expanded. DOJ teams pored over hundreds of sealed complaints, reopened cases that had been closed without interviews, and found a trail of deliberate negligence stretching back over a decade. The pattern was undeniable. Officers with repeat accusations being shuffled between departments, victims discouraged from pursuing charges, and, in some cases, key footage mysteriously missing. Public trust was shattered. But something unexpected happened, too. Officers within the department, particularly women and officers of color, began stepping forward. They spoke of being silenced, sidelined, intimidated into silence for trying to do the right thing. A detective who had served for 15 years admitted to having been punished with overnight patrol shifts after supporting a civilian's complaint. A female lieutenant admitted under oath that she had once been told to keep her mouth shut if she wanted a pension. One by one, the silence broke. Sophia met with many of them, not in press conferences, but in small rooms with closed doors where fear still lingered. She listened, again and again, documenting everything. The city's narrative had changed, from protect the department to repair what's broken. One evening, Sophia stood before the state legislature in Trenton. She wasn't there to speak about herself. She was there to introduce the Dignity Act, a sweeping reform bill that included mandatory public transparency of officer misconduct records, independent civilian review boards with subpoena power, required de-escalation and cultural bias training, and legal protections for whistleblowers within departments. As she stood at the podium, holding the same binder she had carried for months, she said, "The badge should be a symbol of service, not silence. Power without accountability isn't strength. It's violence in uniform." The bill passed unanimously in the Senate 2 weeks later. The governor signed it on a live broadcast surrounded by survivors and advocates. For many, it was a win. For Sophia, it was a beginning. The legal outcome for Sergeant Hagen came in late fall. He was found guilty of assault and obstruction of justice, sentenced to 2 years probation and mandatory community service under the supervision of the very department he had once controlled. He would no longer wear a badge. He would no longer carry a gun. Officer Decker resigned quietly, choosing not to speak publicly. Captain Delgado, who had initially tried to contain the incident, retired under public pressure and was later revealed to have ignored at least 5 written reports of excessive force. Several other officials were removed or reassigned, but Sophia never celebrated. Not because she didn't feel vindicated, but because she knew too many names that would never reach a courtroom. Names like LaTanya Rivera, who was shoved into a squad car for talking back. Names like Evelyn Brooks, who called for help and ended up handcuffed. Names like Amina, who had fled an abusive partner only to be told she didn't look scared enough. For every step forward, Sophia carried the memory of those who were never heard. Months later, long after the cameras faded, Sophia returned to the same corner in Newark where it all began. Tony's Market had changed ownership. The boy she'd bought snacks for that day had since been placed in a foster program and now attended school in Montclair. Sophia placed a bottle of water and a granola bar on the sidewalk near the front steps. A quiet offering, a full circle moment, a reminder that justice wasn't loud. It was persistent. It was daily. And sometimes it wore sneakers and carried nothing but truth. She walked away slowly, pulling her hoodie up over her head, just as she had that morning months before. But this time, no one saw a threat. No one called the police. Because the city had changed just a little. Because silence had been broken, and the echo of her voice still lingered. And that, perhaps, was the real punch. Not the one thrown in anger, but the one that kept landing. In legislation, in policy, in the hearts of those who finally started to listen.